self is before deciding to put it in a prison. Is that right there? And this is the prison of non-relatedness. This is the prison where self says, all right, these parts of self are allowed to relate to others. These parts are not. So self has an aspect of self that is related and interconnected, and then self has an aspect of self that is in an isolation chamber. Isolation, solitary confinement. Does anyone know what it is like to be in solitary confinement?
Yes.
For years and years and years?
Yes.
Lifetimes, lifetimes, lifetimes. When self is in that solitary confinement, it becomes a distant aspect of self, does it not? And then the developed, related self seems to acquire quite a bit of energy, does it not? And self, on one level, feels that self is doing all right, so to speak, from the related self. The part that's in solitary confinement is wasting away from neglect and lack of contact. Is that quite clear? Very, very painful indeed. So once again, self, and yet this is, once again, this behavior, this is not to be judged. This is not a source of shame. Is that part clear for everyone? Yes. This is a source of compassion for self, so that self can go on the journey, deep inside, closet within closet within closet, to find the box within the box within the box, to find that buried self, yes? And to find out, who is that being? Is that being truly too much, too little, too sensitive, too vulnerable, too needy, too emotional, too unique, too bright, too vivid, too powerful, too big, too small, too purple, too pink?
Can I just ask one question regarding that?
Yes, indeed.
I know we're talking about denying the self, valuing the self, finding the self. I mean, I just keep asking my question, what is the fundamental self then? What is the essential nature of self that we're always trying to hold on to, that we're trying to make sure we get to? And I just see that's a necessary question. Definition.
What is the fundamental self?
Yeah, we're all talking about valuing, denying, loving. What is this self that goes down all these beliefs we think we have of it?
Well, the self, of course, the use of the word self is quite a large term, is it not? Who is the self that is asking the question right now? Who is the self, this goes for everyone, who is the self that's sitting here in the circle?
Love.
What was that?
Love.
Love, indeed. On one level, self, the students can feel all levels of themselves, so to speak. The great level, at the monadic level, so to speak. The self is the experience of shall we say, unique differentiation, so to speak, within the oneness that is source. That is a rather core description of self. There have been many identities throughout many incarnations, have there not? All expressions of this unique, individuated, differentiated aspect of source's being that is self. Self can simply call it the soul. There are many, many, many variations on it, are there not? And yet there's a core place within. When self truly experiences and examines self's daily life, what does self discover? Does self not discover that there is a voice inside, very deep inside, a soft voice that is, shall we say, a voice of self's truth?
Yes.
Yes? Self may not always be able to hear it or to understand it. Yet there is a push, there is an energy, there is a feeling, a sensation, there is a sense of light, there is a sense of being. That is the self. Is that quite clear? And this is the eternal self, is it not? It cannot go away, no matter how many times that self would like to betray it, chop it up, make it go away, push it down, what have you. And so the uncovering of self is an eternal process. The layer after layer after layer after layer into eternity. And that is because Source is always evolving, is it not? Therefore, the self is evolving at all times. So perhaps on one level, to use language to pin down the definition of self gets rather interesting, does it not?
Yes.
What is important is that it is recognizable, even as it is becoming. It is forever in a becoming process, is it not? And in this becoming process, self feels this constancy of energy, this essence, this quality of love, light, sound, this quality of thought, this quality of creativity, and all of that, shall we say, describes the unique differentiated self, so far good. And of course, it is not necessary for the students to be, shall we say, to dwell in contact with that core self at all times. That is a natural process that unfolds naturally. All that is required is that the students allow themselves to listen for the self. And more often than not, the students will discover that there are that the self is in pieces, is it not? The acceptable self, the non-acceptable self, the active self, the repressed self, etc. And it is humankind's job to do what? To pick up all the pieces and put them all in the basket together with that core place, and allow all the pieces to synthesize within. And then that becomes the end of self-betrayal. So this is as best as we could do with the question about self.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So get to please read that last question.
I'm struggling with allowing others to see me as I am. How does that apply to the lesson of self-love or self-betrayal?
Yes, indeed. Indeed, when self struggles with others, self does not trust that others will receive self. Self projects a false belief that somehow self is unacceptable, or that there will be something not quite right about self. In that moment, self has put self, as we said earlier, in the shoes of others and left self alone. That is an experience of self-abandonment, is it not? And of course, when that is a very strong imprint, is it not? And it affects self's relationship with self, with the soul, the oversoul, the monadic level, with Source itself, the issue of abandonment. So yes, indeed, there is a form of betrayal that says, don't take the risk to expose self to others. It is not safe. Once again, the loving voice in that self-betrayer says, I want to keep you safe. And so therefore, don't take the chance that others will find self acceptable. And protect that self, that supposedly unacceptable self. So that others don't betray self, abandon self, hurt self, judge self, condemn self, etc. Or perhaps self is trying to hold on to a sense of self. And perhaps in many lifetimes, self is given that sense over, that self over to others. Everyone here knows what it's like to give self to someone else. Has anyone here ever done that?
Yes.
What happens when self gives away self to somebody else?
This is kind of a victimhood.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. What else?
Loss of power.
Yes, indeed. Very much so.
And resentment can come up.
Yes, quite a bit, indeed. And self gets angry. Yes? Why? Because why should self have to give self over, give away self, so to speak, in order to be loved, supported, what have you? And so there is this notion that self might have to literally relinquish the self, all in order to be loved, and yet others are loving what? Where's the self? The self is not there. It's just been given over to the other person, is it not? So it gets rather convoluted. Yes? So it is most important that if self needs to hold on to self, self can hold on to self. If self needs to practice holding on to self, so that self does not give over to others, self can do that. And yet self does not have to be in hiding in order to do that. That's right there. And then that is one part of it. And the other part of it is, if self is afraid of the negative reaction of others, if self shows self, then does self truly want to be close with those others?
Well, you don't know until you try.
If everyone here said, all right, if it costs self's expression in order to be in relationship to a certain group of people, is it worth having that relationship?
No.
No,
Indeed. How come?
because it takes self away.
Yes, indeed. And so then it becomes a setup, does it not? Of old belief systems that say stuff will not be loved, stuff will not be received, accepted, etc. Self's needs will not be honored. Self's feelings will not be honored. And so it is very interesting, because as these self-betrayal patterns are getting played out, the student unwittingly, at an unconscious level, draws just the right group of people to him or her to do what? To reject self. Yes? Self senses it, and that reinforces that sense that, oh, better hide self even more. Is that quite clear?
What if there's no one else to turn to?
Oh goodness, that is like saying there is no loving being on the planet, yes? Is that true?
Yes.
Is it true? No loving being
No,
on the
I
planet?
mean, no.
Perhaps this group excludes it, yes? And yet that is the feeling of that level of isolation, is it not? That there is no other person on the planet that would absolutely, unconditionally adore all aspects of self. All aspects. And until self can allow self to see the illusion in that, then self will feel compelled to buffer the fear of that pain of isolation by betraying self, by masking or hiding the pieces of self. Is that part clear? As self finds the courage to challenge that false belief that there is no other person on the planet that could unconditionally love self, as self challenges that false belief, that challenge is instigated by a fierce commitment to love self. Even if there is absolutely no other person on the planet who would feel the same way for self. So